how would they ever get help in this broken system?
Well, and not only that, but, veteran statistics are really high. So, veterans have a higher statistic of experience homelessness, higher statistics of being arrested, higher statistics of divorce. And I kind of understand why now, because they're not getting the help that they need. And so all of this affects all these other areas. And so, I was raised, my parents have been married, my grandparents for a long time. And so, whenever I made a commitment to Matt, it was a commitment. And so I was like, we're going to make it through this. So I was kind of like, let's go. But I can completely understand the wives that walk away, because it was hard. It was very hard. And it wasn't just towards me, it was towards our children. And so seeing them in that situation, that's what was my line.
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential. And here's your host, Jeff Crank.
Well, thank you for joining us for another episode of American Potential. We appreciate your support on this podcast. It's grown so much over the last year, continues to grow because of viewers and listeners like you. So thank you. Catch us on YouTube, by the way, full video versions on our YouTube channel. We'd love to have you watch us there, or you can listen to us anywhere that podcasts can be found. When a loved one cannot advocate for themselves because they're too sick or they're injured, a family member often has to take that responsibility on. And today's guest found herself in that situation after her husband suffered head trauma from a motorcycle accident. Now, her husband's a veteran, and she's worked around veterans before, and she heard that some didn't like to seek treatment from the Department of Veterans Affairs. But she never knew why until she had to try and get treatment for her husband. Because there was a delay in getting him into a traumatic brain injury rehabilitation center and having someone monitor his medication, his condition got worse and put a strain on the family. She was able to get connected to Concerned Veterans for America, and she learned about the Mission Act and how her husband qualified for community care, but was never told that was even an option for him. So I want to welcome Cay Blaylock, who is the wife of Army veteran Matt Blaylock, to the show to talk about her experience of dealing with the Veterans Administration. Cay, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we were just talking briefly beforehand. First of all, a very difficult situation for your husband, compounded really by the VA and, sort of their obstinance in wanting, not to tell you about community care and those kinds of options. But talk a little bit about how you met. Let's start with how you met your husband, Matt.
We actually were in Florida together. We kind of followed each other around the country, but never knew each other. So whenever we were in Florida, I was working at it was kind of like it's transitional housing for veterans. The Iraq and Afghanistan veterans had like a transitional housing facility there, and I was the activity coordinator. And Matt came there, a social worker brought him, and the first thing that he asked was, "Who is this girl?" And the social worker said, "Well, that's the activity coordinator. You're not going to give her a hard time, are you?" And he said, "Give her a hard time? No, I'm going to marry her." And literally a year later, he did. So it was really quick. But he
so it was love at first sight for him. It sounds like
for
right?
him. Yes.
Okay. Now I want to know how about for you? Was it love at first sight for you, or did he have to convince you a little bit?
No, well, I definitely saw him. Whenever I walked in one day, he was at his computer, and I remember walking in, and I had that day scheduled for us to watch Duck Dynasty at the Veterans Activity Center, and I went to him because he got my attention, and I said, "Hey, I'm Cay. Would you like to watch Duck Dynasty?" And he said, "Yes." And he jumped up, and we started talking. And come to find out, we actually, our parents, our families, lived about 40 minutes from each other in South Carolina.
Wow.
It was crazy. We literally have been following each other through the country. So that's how we got connected. And we ended up, going on holiday, like when we had Christmas and Thanksgiving, we just rode together back to South Carolina. And so we got to know each other.
Yeah. Well, that's great. That's great. What a great story. Now, Matt served 3 combat deployments in 4 years and was suffering from PTSD. What did he do to help cope with that PTSD?
Well, whenever we lived in Florida, he played basketball. That was his thing. He was constantly playing basketball. But we moved back to South Carolina, and we literally live in the middle of nowhere. And there are any gyms near us. So he said that he was going to get a motorcycle, and that's what he was going to do, which in Florida, I told him absolutely not. But here I thought, well, it's not as much to worry about. So I said, sure. And so that's what he did. He got a motorcycle.
Yeah. So then he got in a motorcycle accident. Now tell us about that tragic day.
Yeah, so that was September 15th. He decided that he was going to go on a motorcycle ride. He came in, he was working outside, and he said, Kay, it's such a beautiful day. I'm just going to go for a ride. I said, okay, make sure you wear your helmet. So he left. He told everybody goodbye, and he was just going to go up the mountains here in South Carolina. And it was about an hour later. So it wasn't that long at all. I received a phone call from the hospital. And the initial call, this is what they told me, that he had a wrist broken. That was it. So I didn't know anything. Yep. They said his wrist is broken. The other one may be as well. I was like, okay. So, we live with my parents. So I got my mom and I was like, can you watch the kids? I'm just going to run to the hospital. They said it was just a broken wrist. He should be fine. So I ran to the hospital and they called me again, which I thought was odd. And they said, well, he has a little bit of a head injury. They didn't give me any details. And I was like, okay, a little bit of a head injury. All right. But I said, was he awake? And they said, well, he's thrashing around. And I was like, okay. So I got to the hospital. I literally had to wait 8 hours before I saw him.
Really?
That's how bad it was. And it was the police officer that told me the extent of his injuries. And it was a very bad motorcycle accident.
Yeah. So you found out more over the next, I guess, many hours and days, really, about how bad it was, right?
Correct. He had a head trauma, so a traumatic brain injury. He had a broken pelvis, 2 broken wrists. He had lacerations on his legs and his chest. So the next day, he was unconscious, and the next day they had to do 2 big surgeries. They said that he wasn't going to walk for a good 3 months because of the broken pelvis. But once they got in there, they realized that, the pelvis was broken, but it wasn't to the extent that they had originally thought. It was moving really well. But they still said he wasn't going to be able to put any weight on it or anything like that. So he was unconscious for the day that the 15th and the 16th, both of those days.
So tell us what it was like, or what, Matt's condition was in the hospital for all that time.
So initially the condition, whenever he was unconscious, I didn't know anything was going to be that bad. I didn't really know anything about head trauma. So whenever he woke up, and I warned the staff at the hospital, I said, listen, he has post-traumatic stress. And I really want you guys to be careful when waking him up. He isn't going to know where he's at. He's not going to have any idea of what happened. So we really need to be careful. So they were like, oh, we know, we'll figure it out. So whenever we initially started pulling back the medications so that he could wake up, he woke up extremely angry, and he woke up, he didn't know. He thought he was in a combat zone. So he woke up trying to pull everything out. It took 6 of us to hold him down. So my husband's in the ER and we're holding him down, 6 of us. And then finally, they said, well, we're going to put him back to sleep and try this again in the morning. They had the most medication that they can give him to keep him calm at that point. And that wasn't working. So they had to give him more medication to actually put him back under. So the next day, we tried again in the morning with a different, crew, and we were prepared that time. And so he did wake up. They got the tube out of his mouth, and they asked him, who I was, and he knew who I was, and he knew who our kids were. So I thought, his brain injury might not be that bad. But what I didn't know is that was just the initial. And then I went back home, and the next day I came back, and he had forgotten all of us. He'd forgotten our children. He forgot my name. He kept calling me Sarah, which is his sister. And I was like, okay, I'm not Sarah, I'm Cay. But he knew I was his wife, but he did not know our children at all. He didn't know that we had Cora and Troy. So at that point, it was more real. So, and he was stuck. He was in foster care whenever he was young. So whenever he kind of had to go through all of his childhood again and then into, being in the military. So at that point, he was stuck in the foster care. And then the next day he was stuck in military time. And that's where he stayed, was military time for a long time.
Yeah. And so when he was stuck in that military time, was he still kind of reliving some of the stuff that caused the initial PTSD as well?
Yes, he was. He thought he was on a base. He used all military terms. And, I'm not familiar with all those. So, and nobody actually at the hospital was, but he thought he was at, a military hospital. So he was very, very confused.
Yeah. Wow. Terrible to have to go through. And how long of a period did that take for him to kind of go through that different stages of his life and that process?
It took about 2 weeks. So,
gotcha.
Yeah. And that was really hard for our kids because my daughter had just turned 5. So she was 4 at the time. And I try not to keep things from her. I try to speak to her in her language. So I was explaining that Daddy's head was hurt and that he was having a hard time remembering. And she asked me, does he remember me? And I had to tell her, baby, he doesn't right now, but he will. So that was a really hard time trying to explain it to her, trying to balance being at the hospital and being with my kids, really just provide that support and constant, being consistent with them and with him, because if I wasn't there, then how was he going to remember us?
Sure. Now, how about your kids? How did they get through this? Must have been very tough for them too, to see their dad going through that. It's very scary, but it's really scary when your dad doesn't recognize you. I mean, I'm sure those are very traumatic moments for your kids.
It was, but the hospital wouldn't allow my kids to visit.
Really?
Yep. They were not allowed there at all. So that made it even like a little bit harder just to be able to balance both of them because I couldn't take the kids. We try to keep everything as consistent as possible with their daily schedule. My son's 1, so he didn't really know anything that was going on.
Yeah.
But my daughter, she again was 4, so we made sure that she was going to her Mom's Morning Out program. My parents made sure that they were constantly there. We didn't have anyone that, she didn't know take care of her.
Right.
People were offering, but we made sure that we were just consistent as possible. And that's really what we had to do.
Yeah. But still super scary when you're 4 years old, knowing that that's going on. It's that uncertainty that kind of scars
and
kids.
Every night she prayed for her daddy. She would, we sang, I Speak Jesus, every night before she went to bed. And she would say, this is for my daddy, and just speak over him and ask God to just take care of him and help him remember. So she knew something was big. She just didn't understand the extent.
Well, listen, I'm getting older and I'm getting to be a big sissy. So you're about to make me cry. So we're going to have to ask a different question than that. But that's super sweet that your daughter would do that. Sounds like she's been raised very well.
We try.
So yeah, I think you're doing great. So while he was in the hospital, you contacted the Veterans Administration to kind of get the process started for his rehab. Talk about that.
Correct.
Tell us what happened.
Well, initially, while he was still at the ER, or like in the he was in the traumatic portion of it, so he wasn't in the actual hospital yet. They told me that they would not send him to a traumatic brain injury rehab. The VA said that they were only going to pay for a nursing home. That was it. And so I didn't know what to do at that point. I'm like, a nursing home? He's 36 years old, and it took 6 of us to hold him down just whenever he was waking up. A nursing home is not an adequate location for him. So I actually I was like, I got to do something. So I ended up reaching out to our our congressman to see if they could do something. So I just wrote out an inquiry and put it in. Now, they never reached back out to me and I didn't know, but concerned veterans let me know that that because of my inquiry, the VA actually decided not to send him to a nursing home, but to pay for a traumatic brain injury rehab. Now, the catch was that the VA said they would only pay for a VA hospital. They wouldn't pay for community care.
Wow.
Yep.
Which is an issue that we it recurs all the time. We hear it all the time of the VA continuing to push that narrative that they can't go get veterans care, and that's not the law. But go ahead.
Correct. It wasn't the law. And I had no idea that the Mission Act even existed.
Sure. Because the VA doesn't want you to know that. That's why, Cay, right?
Correct. And mind you, I was at that point just grateful. I was grateful that we weren't going the nursing home route, that we were going to get an actual care that he needed. So they had to send his file, though, to different VAs, and they said only within our region. So the first was sent to Columbia, South Carolina. Then they sent it to Augusta, Georgia. Then they sent it to Tampa and then Virginia. And each location had to deny him before they could send it to a new location. And if he was denied for all of the locations in our area, then they would pay for community care, is what they said.
Yeah.
So I was like, wow.
Just bureaucracy. I mean, it's just nonsensical bureaucracy, while you're dealing with this tragedy, they're doing that.
And not only that, but during that time, he's removing his stitches and exposing the hardware on his wrist. And he has to be kept in I called it a cage, but it was over the bed because he didn't know anything was wrong with him. So he's exposing all of his stitches. He had to have additional surgeries just to fix that surgery.
That's incredible. And I will just add this, and this is my commentary, all because the VA wants to protect the VA health system and not have choice for veterans. I mean, it's infuriating. They should want their concern should be the care of your husband. It shouldn't be whether they have jobs or, this facility is used over that one. They ought to be concerned about getting you the best care for your husband, getting your husband the best care. It's just, this stuff is so infuriating to me. But let's continue on, I guess, with your story. I just, so frustrating. And I want to make a point. You said the only reason that they even went off the nursing home issue was because you contacted a U.S. senator, and because of that inquiry, they moved a congressman, U.S. congressman. Okay.
Yep. That is the only reason that they even allowed us to seek rehab instead of a nursing home, is because of a congressman. It took a political person to intervene in order to get my husband care.
Well, and again, how many people don't know, how many veterans are out there that have no idea, or spouses of veterans who don't know, oh, I'm running into problems. I should contact my congressman, or I should contact my senator. I mean, you knew that, right? You were told that.
Actually, I did it. I didn't know. I just did it just because I had to do something. And the next day they changed their plan. And I wasn't told it was because of the congressman. I wasn't told anything. So I didn't know. I literally was reaching out to anyone and everyone. At that point, I was like, we got to do something. And so I didn't know that they actually helped.
Yeah. Who was the congressman? Let's at least give them some kudos for getting that done for you.
Yes. Jeff Duncan.
Excellent. Well, there you go, Congressman. Thank you. Appreciate you doing that. Great constituent services. But the point is, we shouldn't have to have veterans or spouses of veterans having to call their member of Congress. They should just call and get care, and they should get the best care. It makes me so angry. One thing you kept asking about was his medication and who was monitoring the medication. Why was it so hard to get that answer? And what concerns did you have about his medication?
So whenever we were actually at the hospital, people were monitoring his medication. And whenever he went into rehab, there was a lot of doctors that they said that they had to keep giving him different medications because brain injuries, they change, and so they had to actually monitor it while he was there. So whenever he was released, that's whenever, we went with the VA. And so that's whenever everything just fell through the cracks. They had an appointment scheduled with the traumatic brain injury doctor that's in Columbia. It was a virtual appointment. And through that appointment, like figured out what Matt needed, right? And so even within those 2 weeks of him being home, I knew that there was something wrong. Like he was up and down, and it was constantly like that. And so whenever I went over to the phone and I took it from my husband, I said, "What about, the brain? What about what we're doing with this, the mood?" And he was like, "Well, we need to get mental health on board." I was like, "Okay, is that who's monitoring medication?" They said, "Well, psychiatry has to actually monitor medication." I said, "Okay." So I thought we were going to have all this in place, right? No, everything else fell in place, like all of the PT and OT, but mental health never did. And so I ended up calling the VA and being like, "Hey, I've got to get an appointment for him. He's up and down. He's even threatening to cut off his cast with a saw. Like he doesn't understand that things are happening. What can we do?" And they told me that a primary care physician has to put in an inquiry for us to even get a mental health appointment. And I was like, "Are you kidding me?" So, and then they looked and like, "Oh, well, that was put in like the last week." And I was like, "Okay, so it's there. So can we schedule an appointment?" And they said, "Well, not with me. It has to be through the scheduler. Just wait a couple of days." So I'm waiting a couple of days. No one reaches out at all. And Matt's just, again, up and down, up and down, up and down. And I'm the one dealing out his medication. So I'm making sure that he's taking his medication. But it was so hard, like just dealing with this. And when we finally got an appointment, it was actually until January. Like it was January 8th. I'm like, we have to wait until January. And this was in like the end of October, beginning of November. And then on top of that, it was just a mental health appointment. It wasn't a psychiatry appointment. They never schedule a psychiatry appointment. So no one is monitoring his medication at all. And that's what led to him actually having a manic episode. Yeah. And it didn't have to happen.
No, it doesn't. And these are the kinds of infuriating stories you hear, like they're putting bureaucracy over your husband. And this isn't, I mean, you're telling us one case. How many thousands or millions more are there just like this that are out
seriously.
there? That it's so frustrating. Again, Matt's very fortunate that he had you to help him. I feel sorry for, imagine the veteran who maybe isn't married or doesn't have family. How would they ever get help in this broken system?
Well, and not only that, but veteran statistics are really high. So, veterans have a higher statistic of experience homelessness, higher statistics of being arrested, higher statistics of divorce. And I kind of understand why now, because they're not getting the help that they need. And so all of this affects all these other areas. And so, I was raised, my parents have been married, my grandparents for a long time. And so, whenever I made a commitment to Matt, it was a commitment. And so I was like, we're going to make it through this. So I was kind of like, let's go. But I can understand, I can completely understand the wives that walk away, because it was hard. It was very hard. And it wasn't just towards me, it was towards our children. And so seeing them in that situation, kind of, that's what was my line. So I had to draw.
Yeah. Well, now you were able to get connected with someone from Concerned Veterans for America. After you talked with them, what did they tell you? What did you learn? How did that help move things along to get Matt an appointment?
What I learned was that everything that the VA was doing was illegal. And at that point, and I was like, "Are you kidding me?" Like, I was waiting in the hospital just for him to be sent to a rehab. That wasn't happening. And it was illegal that they were sending it to everywhere else. Whenever the rehab that we went to was attached to the hospital that we were at, so they were sending it to all of these different states. I'm like, "Are you kidding me? We could have just gone straight into the place that he ended up." And I was like, okay, and I'm having to take him to all of these additional appointments for surgeries that didn't have to happen. If they were working on his brain, then he wouldn't have, exposed his hardware. He wouldn't have had to have additional surgeries. And I'm like, the medical neglect that happened here, and the fact that it didn't have to happen. And then with my husband being up and down and all the moods and everything, and we could have had an appointment with mental health way sooner if they had just gone with what was already provided. Like it is like they already provided this, this bill that you can go through community care, but they weren't following through with it. And so and at that point I got angry. You know, I was on survival mode before, and then now I'm on, well, no, now we're in a fight mode. So they actually got me connected to Frank Bullock here in South Carolina, and he worked with congressmen. And he looked into our file and he was like, yeah, it was because of the congressman that you were even allowed to go to a rehab. I was like, that's so good to know. So he told me to write down everything that had happened, all the dates, all the communication that I had with the VA. So that's the first thing that I did. And I wrote them down, man. I wrote down every single conversation. And then he told me to send in an additional inquiry for mental health, primary care, and we actually applied for a program that they have that if a veteran is going to need 6 months plus of care, that the VA would do a caregiver program in which they would compensate a little bit with finances. And we were denied that program too. So we're denied everything. It was crazy. And so I had to list out everything. I had to do the inquiry. And the next day, the VA calls me with every single mental health appointment. Like every day they had an appointment available. Every single day. Ugh. And I was like, wow. Are you kidding? Are you kidding? Like, I've been begging for him to be able to see a counselor. And y'all said no. And then because, again, a congressman got involved, y'all have an appointment. They said, we have one today you can go to.
Yeah. I mean, there's no other way to explain it except, you know, complete incompetence, bureaucracy, and these silly rules. Instead of just taking care of Matt, you know, they throw up all of these barriers in front of you. And again, thankfully, Matt had you as his advocate, but how many veterans don't have that?
No.
It's just so frustrating. How's Matt doing now? How's he doing?
So now he's doing much better.
Great.
We went through a really dark area where, you know, he had that manic episode. And something else that we had to do was we actually had to get the police involved. Because he couldn't understand what was going on, which I get. Like, if it's in your head, it's hard for you to see. So we had to get the police involved, and he went willingly to be committed. He went to the hospital, and I get a call from the psychiatrist there, and they're like, who's monitoring his medication? I said, I don't know. There's no one monitoring this. So they ended up sending him to an acute mental health facility, hospital, and they got all of his medication regulated. When he came back, everything has been so much better. He feels better. He's walking straight. You know, before he was all wobbly, and it was because he was overly medicated at that point. So he is physically feeling better. He's mentally feeling better. And so it's just been such a big difference. We ran away last week, you know, got the kids and my family, and we just ran away to Florida. And that was so wonderful. You know, he was able to be part of a family again, you know, and have, I'm trying to reconnect him and our daughter, because it was such a hard time for her. But now daddy's daddy again. Well, he's becoming daddy again. We still have to go through a lot, but he's getting there. So that's really, it's encouraging now.
Yeah. Well, that's great. And it's so great to hear. He wouldn't be there if you hadn't fought for him. And if you would have just taken what the VA told you and didn't push back and, you know, call your member of Congress and those sorts of things, he wouldn't be where he is today. I mean, I think would you agree with that?
I would. And, you know, and just to piggyback off that, I'm going to have to do another inquiry today to Congressman, because the VA wants compensated from everything that has happened. So they, you know, we have a lawyer because of the accident, and we're not going to be able to get any of the money because the VA says that they want $80,000 back. And I'm like, for what care? So it is just, it's so frustrating that I have to do all of these inquiries just for us to be able to get care and to be able to support ourselves. Gosh. And so it's just really frustrating. And I have to list out every single thing that we have been through in order for them to see that they have not done anything that they were supposed to. And in fact, they've done the illegal stuff.
Right. Yeah.
So,
wow.
This will be my fourth inquiry.
Well, that's amazing. That's incredible. Through your experience, you want to help other families, though. So,
yes.
So they don't have to go through all of this. What advice would you give a veteran or a family member of a veteran looking for care?
Well, the first advice that I would give them is to do exactly what Frank told me to do and write down every single conversation, because you will meet people at the VA that are absolutely wonderful. They're so caring and so warm and do everything that they're supposed to. And then you think you're crazy because you experience all these other things and you're like, did it really happen? Because your emotions are up and down with any type of care. But then you can look back at the conversations and be like, no, I really did reach out 4 times for mental health appointments. This person is willing to help. All these other people were not. So, make sure that you are writing everything down. That would be my first thing. And then also, you're going to have to get tough. Like anytime that I reach out to the VA now, my first thing that I say is, I've already done 3 congressional inquiries. I'm not afraid to do another one. Let's get it right the first time. And you have to. You have to, or else they don't listen. And so it's like, you got to get a little tough and know who your congressman is. They are like most of them are willing to help. They know me by name now, which is sad that they have to know me by name. But I reach out. Her name is Robin, that does all of the congressional inquiries. And I call her. I'm like, hey, Robin, I have another one for you. She's like, I'll put it in. So, she's very kind. So, know who your congressman is and also know what your rights are. And that's the biggest thing. Say, no, I have a right to that mental health appointment within 20 days of me asking. And if you can't fulfill that, then you need to find community care for me. Yeah. So you just have to know what is correct and what is incorrect, and understand that the VA has been told not to give this information to families. And once you get that understanding and okay, I'm going to have to fight for this, I think that it makes it so much easier, because initially, you want to say that they're going to do what's right. But whenever you know that they're not, you kind of come swinging. Right.
Right. Well, again, I think Matt is very fortunate to have you. I really fear for all the veterans out there that don't have someone like you, a spouse or a family member who cares for them and looks after them. This is a travesty that the government does what they do here, and they're trying to do it just to protect a bureaucracy. They're not trying to help veterans and give them care.
It's political. And we had a veteran that we know that we loved, and he ended up committing suicide last year. And I think, what would have happened if he would have had the care that he needed? Yeah. And I think about that all the time, because he didn't have a wife. He didn't, he was single. So I think that's really something that keeps in my mind. And now I'm just want to help others know that they can do it, and that they can seek help, and that the VA does have things in place for them to get the health care that they deserve. And I want the VA to become a service to our veterans who have served, instead of all the political points that they're having to do. So they need to start having a service attitude instead of a administration attitude. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's people like you holding them accountable. Cay, thank you for telling your story. Blessings to you and to Matt and to your son and your daughter. And it sounds like you're finally healing. No thanks in many ways to the Veterans Administration, but thanks to the diligence that you've had in helping get Matt the care that he needs. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You bet.
Really appreciate it.
All right. Well, you bet. There's another example of, the VA protecting itself, not protecting veterans, and, trying to hide the passage of the Mission Act and these choices that veterans have, taking it off their website. We've talked about that, when you go to their website now, it directs you to all of their resources that the VA has. It doesn't tell veterans that they have the choice to go outside and get community care if that's what they choose. And this is a battle that we need to continue to fight. For our veterans fought for our liberty and freedom. We need to help them and fight for theirs. Don't ever take that for granted. Go out there, defend freedom, defend liberty. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.